Story 1. I've never really posted anything before, but I have a funny revenge karma story that my friends have always enjoyed. I first got to college my freshman year and met the dorm leader resident assistant at most schools. Like most colleges, the dorm leader was the upperclassman who lived in the dorms and monitored the freshman halls. My dorm leader's name was Julio, fake name, by the way, and at first, he seemed like a nice person who minded his own business. He talked about how he would stay out of everyone's business if we would stay out of his. Also, he tried to be the cool dorm leader and always mentioned to me how he consumed large amounts of alcoholic beverages his freshman year in the dorms. He gave off the impression he really didn't care if we ever drank in our dorm rooms, but to just keep it discreet if we did. I really didn't drink much at all, but I appreciated the fact he seemed pretty normal and didn't try to report on students. During the last week of October of my freshman year of college, I had one of the hardest weeks of my academic career. I was a biochemistry major taking some pretty tough classes and had 3 exams that week. At the end of the week, a friend I had recently made down the hall invited me to his dorm room to watch an upcoming National Basketball Association game. As we were watching the game, he had a bottle of vodka and gave some to the guys in the dorm. Being a naive and inexperienced freshman student just trying to make some friends, I took 1 shot of vodka and continued to watch the game. As we're watching the game, one of the guys in the dorm spills a bottle of soda and rushes to the bathroom to grab some paper towels. As he walked out of the dorm room, Julio walked by and noticed the bottle of vodka. He laughed and said something along the lines of, "I remember when I was a freshman, haha, just try and keep it down." We thanked him and told him to have a good night. It seemed like a normal conversation and nothing out of the ordinary. 30 minutes later, we hear a knock on the door, and 2 policemen show up with breathalyzers. They told us they had received a complaint from Julio about underage drinking and a party being thrown in the dorm room. Remember, it was 3 guys watching a Los Angeles Lakers game on a Thursday night at 8 p.m. I ended up getting a minor in consumption charge for blowing a .02, had to do 20 hours of community service, write a reflection journal, and appear before the Judicial Affairs Center at my college about my supposed drinking problem. I'm not blaming the officer for giving me a ticket, but I was pretty upset that Julio, who always talked about getting intoxicated freshman year in the dorm, called the police right after he essentially gave us the okay for the night. A few weeks later, I saw Julio and straight up asked him why he decided to report me. Specifically, I asked why he didn't just tell me to head back to my dorm if he had a problem with the alcohol, instead of calling the police right after our conversation. He responds word for word with, "You made a decision and had to suffer the consequences of that decision." After that incident, I never really talked to him, but he always tried to be buddy-buddy when he saw me in the hallway. Anyway, I eventually leave the dorms and move off campus for my sophomore year. I had decided to rush a fraternity my freshman year and ended up meeting some really nice guys. I have never been the fraternity type, but I went to a smaller college where fraternities are a lot different than most places. During the 2nd semester of my sophomore year, my fraternity was taking a new pledge class. One day I received a text from Julio saying, "One of the guys pledging your fraternity has been caught distributing alcohol to another freshman in the dorms. I thought I would let you know." Turns out Julio was the dorm leader for a freshman pledging my fraternity and reported him to Judicial Affairs as well. Thinking the term distributing alcohol was the lamest funniest thing I have ever heard. I sent that to our fraternity group chat and everyone laughed about it. About a week later, that student pledging our fraternity came up to me asking about the message I received from Julio. Essentially, a pretty similar thing happened to him like what happened to me. Julio found out he had given another student in the dorm a bottle of wine and reported it to the police. This student ended up getting a minor in possession and had to speak with Judicial Affairs. This is where the story gets hilarious. In his meeting with Judicial Affairs, the student pledging our fraternity told the Judicial Affairs representative that his dorm leader Julio was now a senior at this point had texted me about the charges pending against him. Apparently, it's a huge violation to discuss pending charges against a freshman in your dorm to a third party. The Judicial Affairs representative told him that if he could prove Julio was discussing this charge with a third party aka me, he would receive severe sanctions. Basically, if I sent that text to the Judicial Affairs people, Julio would be in a lot of trouble. So I sent the text that night to the Judicial Affairs people. After that, I didn't hear anything about what happened to Julio and had honestly forgotten about it. However, nearing the end of the school year in my sophomore year, I saw Julio at the dining hall, and he came up to speak to me. He tells me a story about how he knows I was the one who reported him to judicial affairs, how he ended up getting fired from his dorm leader position, lost the scholarship money his dorm leader job provided him, and overall how difficult his life has been since he got fired. After going through his entire sob story, he asked me, "Why did you do that? This could have been handled completely differently. I didn't have to get fired and I could have kept my scholarship money." I look at him dead in the eye for what seemed like 30 seconds and say, "Julio, you made a decision and had to suffer the consequences of that decision." Top comment on the post. I can imagine what kind of guy Julio is. He's not really popular, so he's trying hard to look cool using his seniority and position. His stories about him drinking as a freshman were one of his ways to make him look cool. It could have been a true story, but it's just probably him drinking alone and no one knows. The fact that he reported people for drinking and used the term distributing alcohol really shows that he's not a popular guy. Probably just an unpopular person who wants to look cool in front of his underclassmen. Story 2. I was reading a post in another subreddit regarding things that cause you to walk out of an interview, and it reminded me of this experience I had 20+ years ago. Hope it fits here? During the dot-com boom in the late 90s, I became somewhat well known for my expertise with a now somewhat obsolete networking technology. I ended up getting heavily recruited by a big telecommunications firm in Denver to run the technical side of a huge networking project they had underway. After multiple phone interviews, I was invited out for the big in-person sit-down, a 2-day affair where I met with the big dogs, other technicians, human resources, etc. It was a pretty impressive opportunity. I took the trip. The first day of meetings went great. I felt it was a great match, etc. I did sense there was some tension between two groups over network architecture. It turned out that was one of the reasons they were bringing in someone more senior who could finalize the approach and get the project moving. That was fine, all part of the job, whatever. I got wined and dined after the first day and was definitely feeling like the job was a match, and that I'd be moving to Denver. I went on the second day, and after another round of interviews, the division head took me to lunch. That's when it all fell apart. While we were at lunch, the firm's senior management canceled the entire project and fired every person associated with it. Apparently, there was a huge internal political war going on. This project was ground zero for the big battle, and this division just lost. We get back from lunch, and the manager escorts me to human resources where we're going to sit down and go over their offer. Instead, he's told what's going on and that he's out of a job along with everyone else on the project. At this point, I was told to leave. No apologies, it was just unfortunate luck for me. What in the world? Okay then, I'm gone. I get back to the hotel, and there's a voicemail for me asking me to call the human resources people. I'm upset, but I call. They tell me they've had to cancel my return ticket and that I need to pay for the hotel myself for now, but that if I would submit an expense report, they might be able to get me a check. There's a second voicemail from the front desk asking me to provide a credit card for the stay. And then I get a call on my cell phone from the car rental company, which I didn't answer. Turns out they also wanted my credit card. Forget that. I called the airline, and they said my reservation had indeed been canceled. But they also acknowledged that the reservation was paid for using a fully refundable ticket which I was holding, and which back in the 90s was essentially as good as cash. They said they wouldn't know for certain if I could board until I showed up at the counter with the physical ticket. Great. Just really great. I'm on the hook for several thousand in airfare, a nice hotel and rental car after taking several days of vacation from my job for this interview. I don't think so. Here's the revenge. I packed my bags and loaded up the rental car, left the keys in the hotel room door, drove the rental car back to Dallas, stayed overnight in Amarillo, dropped the rental at the Hertz lot at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, took their shuttle to the terminal I'd left my car at and drove home. Over the next few months, I got several unpleasant phone calls from their human resources and accounting departments demanding I pay them back for the trip, including paying for the $700 drop-off fee for the car. Never answered them, of course, just let them go to voicemail. eventually got a demand letter from their legal department, paid an attorney a nominal fee to send them a demand for compensation, threatened a lawsuit letter. Never heard from the firm again. Side note, the ticket itself was still valid. I ended up selling it to a friend at a big discount, and he was able to use it. Top comment on the post. For a big telecommunications firm, that is incredibly petty and unprofessional behavior. I get that projects get canceled and turf wars have winners and losers, but treating someone the company pursued and wooed like an internal insurgent to be eradicated by the new regime is ridiculous. They had to know that this would spread the word among your contacts and peers, the kind of folks they might want to hire in the future, that they were a poorly run operation that smart professionals should avoid. Short of you assaulting someone in the interview, the only reasonable action for them would be to say, "Unfortunately, the position is no longer available. Thank you for your time and consideration. The hotel and rental car are paid through tomorrow morning. I hope you have a smooth trip home. Perhaps we will have future opportunities to work together." The combined cost of your travel were probably worth 2 hours worth of rounding errors on their global billing. Story 3. 13 years ago, I was in my late teens, living on my own and really struggling to live financially. One of the few possessions I had was an old laptop. My laptop had stopped working properly, and while I'm fairly proficient in using a computer, I had no idea about fixing them. I did a bit of searching on the internet but couldn't get it working, so I asked my stepfather to take a look. He has a quick look and says it's broken, but he'll take it off my hands if I don't want it. So I said sure, if it's broken then it's no good to me. 10 minutes later, I walk in the room and he's using it. I asked if he fixed it and he said, "Yeah, thanks for the laptop." I was obviously upset. My mother says she wasn't getting involved, and his only response was that he did a quick internet search to find the fix, and I could have done the same. I was broke, and he took one of my only possessions even though he had a personal computer and a laptop already. A few months later, I was visiting my mother and stepfather when I had an idea. While I am useless with computers, I'm very competent with mechanics, specifically Audis, and my stepfather had a 2001 Audi A3. Before coming in the house, I went under his car and unplugged the oil level sensor and a vacuum line for the turbo. Later on that day, he went to go to the shop or something. When he started the car, it threw up oil warning lights on the dash and wouldn't boost. So he turned it off and had a look of concern on his face. I went out to ask him what's wrong, and he said that something had gone majorly wrong. He says something along the lines of catastrophic turbo failure or engine failure. He's already spent quite a bit on repairs and didn't want to spend any more money on it. So he spoke to my mother about just cutting his losses and scrapping it. I asked how much it's worth at the scrapyard, and he said £100. So I ever so graciously offer £120 to take it off his hands to maybe part it out, which he accepts. He signed over the logbook title, wrote me a receipt of purchase, and handed the keys over. I walked outside, lifted the bonnet, pretended to look at my phone for a minute, went under the car and plugged the vacuum line and oil sensor back in, fired it straight up and drove around the block. When I got back, I gave him the thumbs up and said it's all fine now. His mouth was wide open and he was very upset, and my reply was, "You could have found the solution too with a quick internet search." He tried arguing that it wasn't fair, and if it's working then I can't just take his car, but I just said he didn't have a problem tricking me out of my laptop, and that he's already signed the car over to me, so tough luck. My mother kind of laughed and said she's not getting involved and that it was his own fault. I still have the car to this day, and it's practically in showroom condition and runs sweet. Here's the old girl in all her shiny glory. Story 4. For clarification, I was 20 when this happened, and I'm also a male who treats everyone the best I can. When I started my first job while studying for a degree, I met this woman who is very unpleasant. We started to interact and everything went well. She had an abusive boyfriend and then they broke up. So we started dating. That dating time was like one day. We finished the training phase, so we started working attention calls for a subpar internet company. The work was stressful for Mexican sales support because customers and representatives treated us poorly. Enough background, let's jump into the story. After we broke up for some silly reason she made up, I forgot why, she started to say that I was abusive. even that I forced myself on her. The thing is that people and I started to get all annoyed at her behavior, because everyone knew how nice I was with the customers, managers, and other people in my work environment. Well, she continued to spread negativity about me, so we all decided to record the conversations and messages trying to destroy my reputation. We ended up gathering like 100 messages and even got her recorded being the good person she was against me. After a few weeks of gathering information, I went to Human Resources to give my evidence against her because the rumors spread even to Human Resources, and they were trying to fire me. I delivered the information and one by one of my coworkers started to be called to give their statements. It took like 1 hour until every single one of my coworkers was called in. She got called. I got a big apology from Human Resources for being targeted in a hostile environment, and she was fired right away. The thing is that she also needed the money for school, and Human Resources would not give her a recommendation letter from the company. She dropped out of school and now works at a supermarket that, even if it is a lot of miles from where I usually bought my stuff, I still use it as my location to buy groceries, and I went at the same hour she works at and to the same register. I just smile and say, "How is school?" and then leave. It is not that great of a revenge story, but thank goodness people backed me up in the revenge. Miss, if you are reading this, see you on Sunday at the supermarket.